Mark. It's a pleasure to have you on. I'm super excited about this actually, and you jumped on really quickly, so thank you for that.
Thank you. Really good to see you. It's weird not seeing you in ski gear, to be
Oh
honest.
yeah. That was a beautiful, beautiful time
That's
we had
that's
out there.
that's what you look like under that's what you look like under the goggles.
I remember the first time I saw you not wearing skis, though. I was like, I don't know. This just wasn't right. But
This is
yeah, man, I
true.
mean, it's been great getting to know you over the years, and I'm a giant fan of Roster for many reasons. Right before this call, I was talking to one of my investors, and I was like, "Oh, you should check out Roster. They're definitely in the tribe of people like Prism trying to make the music industry better and better." So why don't we just start there? What is Roster? I'm very excited to share this with anyone who doesn't know.
Yeah, look, the core of Roster, we're a music industry described as a music industry directory and data platform. So, we essentially track the music industry. So relationships, who manages artists, who artists are signed to, who's publishing the artist, also the booking agents. So, X agency represents this artist for these territories around the world. And then, as that was the core premise of the platform. But what we've increasingly become is like, almost like your assistant in the music industry. So, we have this feed on our homepage that looks a little bit like an Instagram feed with video and images and signings, but it's all industry related. So we're tracking, when big signings happening, we're tracking hundreds of tours every week that are getting announced, new festivals, adding new companies. And so we've kind of become this, yeah, it's a directory. I want to go and find this info, but we've also become this kind of, again, assistant of, so you can track what's going on across the industry, learn things, discover artists, and that's been pretty cool. But beyond our core product, we're also now getting into a couple of other things. So Roster as a job site where we now are one of the leading places that you find jobs, and we're launching another product next month as well, which is starting to broaden our appeal as well. So I think in addition to our core platform, what Roster is a series of tools that help you do your job in the music industry. We want to help you do some of the boring shit, and we want to help you do it faster. And we're quite happy doing that because we save people time.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to talk about. I'm resisting going into like 15 details that you said there. I think one curiosity that I have now that you've given a nutshell of what roster is. You were at Spotify before this. Why don't you tell your story? It's a cool story getting into this. Yeah, why don't you go from Spotify, or maybe there's something before Spotify that's worthwhile, and then like where did this idea come from?
Yeah, I mean, before Spotify was, I was kind of working in tech, not in music. I joined Spotify at a very lucky time just before it kind of exploded. But what I did at Spotify, I helped launch Spotify in the
What
US
what year
and
and yeah, what year and how many people were
2000,
using it?
2011. So it was just before they hit a million subscribers. It was, it was a thing, but I think it was in 5 countries. There was 150 employees. Like it wasn't tiny, but it was right before you had this kind of crazy hockey stick, and it was about the time when there was still quite a lot of existential threat to it. Like, would it survive? Would it get licensed in the US? And early on, I joined a team called Special Projects, which meant that like we did everything from like make merch to do artist investment rounds. And when we were helping to launch the US, we were working with a lot of artists over in the US, and there was obviously a lot of, at the time, and still is, um, quite a lot of opposition to what Spotify were doing. And myself and this other guy that I was working with, DA Wallach, who was my boss at the time, was artist in residence. We kind of identified that one of Spotify's big problems was just a real lack of education of how streaming was working. And a big part of that problem was that the record labels weren't educating artists on how the economics worked, and Spotify wasn't educating artists on how the economics worked. So there was a lot of misinformation, even where things were, even where there was valid criticisms, they were overshadowed just by a complete, you know, series of myths and misinformation. So we pitched to Spotify and leadership Spotify to start an artist relations team and artist services team. And the core premise there was we weren't going to go around like, buying people drinks. We were going to go around and have hard conversations about how the economics of streaming worked. And we did that for a number of years. So, the early Spotify for artists was, a education website that explained like, hey, here's how the money works, here's how it splits up. And then our job as a team, we were going out and just talking to as many people as we could, artists, managers, agents, attorneys, anyone that wasn't a record label, because we had a team doing that already. And this is where we kind of like lead into ROSTR. I spent a lot of time in those early years on planes and going to places like Nashville and coming to LA where I live now, but didn't back then. And a big part of my job is to try to figure out like who should we speak to? Because we couldn't speak to everybody. So we were trying to figure out as a team like who's really important for us to get in front of and I guess spread the word about what we're trying to do at Spotify. And early on it was kind of easy. It was who was shouting the loudest on whatever Twitter or and there was a few very well-known people who didn't like Spotify, and we tried to work with them. But then beyond that, it started getting to a point where we're like, well, there's always going to be people who don't like what we're doing. Let's try and find some people who like what we're doing and want to work with us. And
Mm.
so, we did a lot of road shows and meetings and throughout the year. So this was going into like 12, 13, 14, and then Spotify started getting popular. And one way or another was the company that everyone wanted to speak with. But I kind of like clearly remember we went to Nashville to do a workshop both for artists and for management companies, and we ended up hiring a local consultant in Nashville who basically told us like, here's who you need to meet. And it seemed kind of wild to me that like we're with Spotify, who again, this was much later, 15, 16, like one of the most in-demand companies, and all of this data, but like no one knows who to speak to in Nashville. And we have to hire somebody to do that. And I had a team of 15, 20 people by this point. And so that was kind of like started to think like this should be easier. Should be easier for me to know which managers are important to speak to in Nashville. And then, this kind of kept happening. And at the time, one of the things I had started at Spotify was starting to build a CRM, like literally a Salesforce database of who was who in the music industry, and found it really, really difficult. So, fast forward a few years.
What year is that, by the way?
So now getting to like, so I moved to LA with Spotify in 2016, and then 2018 I left.
Mm. And
So
2017 is when, the acquisition of Polestar went down. So that's all kind of happening there in the background.
right, yeah, and I mean, look, I knew that these things kind of existed, and we subscribed to services that were supposed to do this, but they kind of sucked.
So you
And
were you were aware of Polestar back
yeah,
then and using it, and what was the limitations with Polestar back then? Yeah.
I mean, look, I don't want to make it about them. I just where we were at as a business, like there was just these very specific things. Like, it's a story I've told a few times now, but it's not. It's like a true story. But we were sitting. This was when I was in LA. We were sitting in the office, and one day this email comes in to like music@spotify.com. I don't know what the email address was, but basically the entire music department. And it was from Daniel Ek, CEO. And the email was one line. It's like, I need to speak to Tools manager today. And like it was kind of hilarious, right?
It
Because like, we had all these people, but
was
Tool were
beautiful.
like, like they were somewhere in the middle of like, one of their 10-year hiatuses. And like everyone was like, who the manages Tool right now? And I mean, I'm not kidding when I say that we had like probably a couple of dozen people texting, emailing, trying to find out this information to be the one who could be like getting back,
I
like, hey,
got
I've
it.
got the manager, right? And I just remember laughing because I was like, wow, this is like wasting so much money. This is so dumb. How can you not find this stuff out, right? And it was because, like, look, there were platforms that do it. When I started ROSTR, to fast forward a bit, like there was two things. One, I didn't think they were fast. I thought they were really slow. And I thought the pain of thinking to go that the process of going to those sites and getting this information was more painful than texting somebody. And
Mm.
that needed to be overcome. It needed to be fast. And then the other thing is that there
Well, you
was,
come from Spotify, which is this beautiful product experience. So I'm starting to piece this all together. Yeah.
well, I mean, that's the thing. And like, go back and forward. I remember we'd sit down with artists and you'd show them like you could just press play and it was like it was faster than loading a track in iTunes. And that's just a huge thing, right?
Hmm.
And just the speed of getting to info. So like when I first got my team together, and it's like early 2019, we sat down with a whiteboard and I said, look, there's a couple of things I want to happen here is I want you to be able to come in, get information, and leave super fast. I don't want to
Yeah.
keep you around. Like I don't want, time on page, session time. I want you to
Mm,
get in and get out. So that's the first thing. And I said the second thing is I want this to feel like it's built by a tech company for the music industry, not built by
mm,
the music
mm.
industry.
That's
And
a double click moment right there. Like that's a thing that happens inside of this industry is there's a, on one side of the coin, there's a kind of resistance to tech people in the music industry, and there's a feeling of not understanding. And then there on the other side of it, there's like technology that erupts like too directly to the music industry isn't known to be extremely user friendly or hasn't gotten a lot of legs. And the folks that are in that intersection, there's not a ton of them.
yeah, I think, it just has to come from that point of view. It's like it manifests in like little things early on, right? So like, oh, our design has changed over time, but like there's tons of white space. And I think that's just important. I want it to feel like why should just because you work in the music industry, why should your software be slow and clunky,
Yeah.
right? And then there's other things like we're not like we have a rule against like there's no like you don't draw like on our homepage there isn't like a shot of like a crowd silhouette with hands up in the air, right? Like we don't use like mini guitar icons and little vinyl. Like I just don't get it. Like I don't want to like I just don't feel like just because you work in the music industry we have to patronize everyone by everything being like about music, right? It should be fast and so like these are the kind of things. So when you ask me like what didn't exist, it's like yeah, some of this stuff existed, but it wasn't fast and it wasn't accessible. And
Yeah.
then the other part that was super important to me was that I felt like it was I, when I was thinking about so jumping around a bit, but when I was starting to think about leaving Spotify to build something like this,
Yeah.
part of the thesis was like, well, look, this is how if this is difficult for me and my team at Spotify, I have like 20 people, they're all connected. I can't find tools manager. Like, what is that like for like a brand or a smaller company or someone trying to get into the industry? Like,
Mhm.
how difficult is it for them?
Why
And
did they want Tool's number?
well, I mean, I don't think Tool were on the platform at the time. And
Oh,
I,
that was
I
it. Okay.
like, yeah, like we'd
Is
be
it a
gone,
Tool
like,
fan or what?
it was like that it was like Led Zeppelin had come to, and I'm super glad they are because I'm a big fan. I just didn't know who managed them. We found the manager and we had a conversation, and but it was
But
I
yeah,
think Daniel had spoken to somebody who was like, you've got to get Tool.
that's
Um,
hilarious. Tool is amazing.
but
Alex Gray famously does their album artwork, and I'm a giant
right,
Alex Gray fan.
yeah,
We are jumping around, which I'm totally cool with. One curiosity that I have is let me. So let's get into the roster story, and you're naturally getting there. But before we do that, I mean, when did Spotify become ubiquitous? What happened there? Because it's at this moment, it's like, don't they have everything? Like 100%? I don't, obviously not 100%, but like, I've never had the moment of like wanting to find something on Spotify that's not there. Like, when did that happen, and how did that happen, and what's your perspective on that?
yeah. So I think like literally the only one I can think of was like Joanna Newsom. Still, I don't think is on Spotify, and that was a big one. Like she released a
Neil
Data
Young there
Wave.
for a minute or whatever, but yeah,
Yeah,
that's a protest. But
I mean, look, I think it was a tipping point, right? Like, you know, it could have gone, it could have tipped the other way. And, it's funny, I've talked about like with the team people who are around, and we like to think like we played some role in convincing the industry, but I'm much more inclined to again at the time my kind of partner in crime with this and boss Da Wallach who did it was he was just like, look, Spotify was on at the forefront of a massive wave that shifted so many things. Like it was forefront of this consumer behavior shift. And, fundamentally the thing that changed it was the amount of money coming out of it. And there's everything else is kind of just like icing. And look, people will say like, artists don't get paid. If there's some things I think is great about streaming. There's other things I think are not so great. But fundamentally, if you look at the numbers, the amount of money that streaming is generating is the main thing that shifted that perspective. And if you look at it in the context of your question, like these artists that people knew were holding out, and again, if you think about it, it was like, at one point Taylor, Led Zeppelin, again, Tool, like these are artists that stood to make a lot of money from it. Right. And so ultimately, you got to this point and but it was, I say there could have been, and it could be in, Philip K. Dick style alternate universe where, Spotify does not exist
Great
because
reference, Philip K. Dick.
like, well, and
Yeah, I dream of an Android, or sorry, Electric Sheep.
yeah,
For those that don't know, Blade Runner, based off of Philip K. Dick, very, very
lots of
famous science
lots of
fiction art
alternate history
novel.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. What's that TV show on Apple?
Amazon
Foundation. All right. Well, Foundation is Philip K. Dick as well.
Foundation's Asimov, no?
Ah, I messed it up.
Yeah.
Dang
Yeah.
it.
It's
Dang it. Yeah, you're
no, but they
right.
had one, Man in the High Castle,
Okay.
one
No,
from
iRobot is Philip K. Dick. Is that right?
I, Robot's also Asimov, I think.
Dang. Dang.
Yeah.
All right. Both of these anyway. Good
Yeah.
reference. But
Um,
either one would work with what you're saying.
so like, yeah, so like you had, I remember when Tidal launched, right? We've been hearing rumblings about Tidal for, I don't know, that early time of Spotify, everything happened really quickly, but we'd been hearing rumblings about it and been getting heads up from different people that, hey, this thing is launching. And part of the plan, like part of the plan that we knew when Tidal launched, so for anyone who wasn't paying attention back there, Tidal obviously was this kind of conglomerate of artists or group of artists that took a position against streaming, led by Jay-Z and a number of others who were going to create an artist-owned, artist-friendly version of Spotify. And part of the thing was that they were all going to pull their music from Spotify. That was very much what, you know, was going to try to create the leverage. And this happened
Yeah.
before Apple Music launched. And so we were hearing about this. And I remember at the time, my boss was a guy called Ken Parks, who ran content at Spotify and did all of the deals in the US, and a really, really key part of Spotify's success and still being around. He called me up, and I'd just become the head of artist services. DA had stepped back, and he was like, "What are you going to do about this title thing?" And I was like, I'm going to LA next week." He's like, "Are you?" I'm like, "Yeah." I was like, "I'm going to go speak to everyone." And so I got off the phone and I booked flights to LA, and we came over here and we met with all of these managers, myself and a couple of others, guy who worked with me, Jordan Gremley. We met with them, and for the first time, we sat in a room with a keynote deck and showed people how much money we were paying out on behalf of their artists to the rights holders. And it was people's jaws were dropping. They were like, and I mean, this is years ago. It was tiny compared to what it is now. But fundamentally, these people started to realize, like, oh shit, there's a lot of money here. It's just our deals that suck. And again, like I'm not whitewashing it. I think there's lots of things that suck about streaming and the transition. There's a lot of artists that have got caught between the cracks. But for these artists and that question, like, why did these people come on board? It's we really showed them, like, hey, this is where the scale will go. And, that did, like, Tidal launched. It was, the if you've not seen the launch press conference, I highly recommend looking it up on YouTube. It's very entertaining. And it never ended up being this thing where people pulled, but like that was a real tipping point. If those artists had pulled their music from Spotify, that was Madonna, it was Arcade Fire, it was Alicia Keys, it was Jay-Z, it was Beyonce, and like if you'd added that to the Led Zeppelins, the Beatles, like whatever, that could have killed the business.
Hmm. Interesting. Um, and in the background while all this is happening, and you kind of touched on it, like there was a greater macro shift from, some grief around, the onset of Napster and a perception in the music industry of like where money is made and a transition from album sales to live. And it very, and I'm I'm looking at like how you started ROSTR, which really came out of Spotify and is also servicing the live industry, and just piecing this all together. It's, really interesting. One of the perceptions out there is that the record labels getting involved with Spotify was a major kind of important thing. I'm not sure how much is public or what the truth is behind that. Is there truth behind that? And, to what extent can you talk about that?
In what sense? Like owning, like having equity
Yeah.
in it?
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean it's all pretty public now, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I think this is, you can take Spotify out of the equation, you look at it, and we'll probably see this again with this next round of, AI companies or whatever. But, the power that the labels have is, allows them to extract that 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 equity or to demand that equity. And it does it creates interesting incentives. Like there's some incentives that are aligned, right? Like, Spotify got big enough, it got to the point where the record label stood to make a lot of money if it successfully IPO'd, right? And so it's this kind of weird symbiosis where you're kind of fighting each other all the time, and it's 2-year licensing terms, is like they're just constantly fighting, but at the same time Spotify got to this point where it's like, oh shit, we can make a lot of money from this thing if it now successfully IPOs. So then they became incentivized for the IPO to be successful. I think now some have got out, some are still in. There's a much different
Does Daniel Ek get the
relationship.
credit for that? Kind of masterminding everyone getting under one roof and playing ball together. It's a pretty brilliant business move.
Um,
Or
I
did it
mean,
just
look,
need to
I think
happen?
no, I think it had to happen. I mean, it wasn't new, right? Like it wasn't like labels had been, taking this position for some time at this point. Um, but I think it was. Look, I think Daniel deserves a huge amount of credit and in all of it. I think a part of it was like really not, and there's some of this stuff is now like kind of like myth making and apocryphal, like, but you know, just having just even trying to go at it, like I think if you'd known more about the music industry, you probably wouldn't have done it. Like, and so just having that kind of like, that drive on the tech side. But honestly, like, this was it was going to happen. The execution was really good from Spotify's side, but also like ton of mistakes along the way. And that was something that, again, somebody said to me like, look, when you're at a wave like this, you can afford to make way more mistakes than you can if you're not at the front of this massive, massive wave.
Mm-hmm. And you brought up AI, and we will get to that at some point. I'm gonna like resist jumping into that right now. But I have kind of a crazy slash not so crazy idea. Like, Spotify has always just been such an incredible product. Like I have a question as to why like Spotify was the one that was anointed and got all this record label resources, and why it was the first one that all the major artists jumped onto. And I wonder if behind that it's just how incredible the product is. I mean, wow, what an amazing product experience. I mean, to this day, and it's still continuing to innovate. Do you think there's some truth to that? And is that part of what is inspiring you behind Roster? It certainly is with me in Prism. I'll say that much.
I mean, I think the big product difference early on with Spotify, I think, was two things. One was the speed. So like, like you can go back, it doesn't do this now because of developments in like content delivery networks and on the edge, like delivery of data. But like back then, Spotify worked on the same technology that torrenting works, right? So you didn't stream from a central server, you streamed from people that were around you, right? Little bits from everybody. And that made it much, much faster back then with the internet and where it was than streaming from the web. So again, going back to like 2009, 2010, 2011. And so that instant play where you could pull up an artist and it would play quicker than playing an MP3, which would spin up like a disk drive or whatever, that was hugely impactful versus other streaming services that had existed before. And this is a similar thing, like YouTube has always been very fast and they've kept it very fast. It's, if you don't have to wait for stuff, you're much more likely to use it. So I think that was super important. And the second part of it was the innovation on the model. And the innovation on the model was the first attempt to provide this free ad supported. And actually, this has been, again, I think somewhat um, brushed over in the past, but I don't. Initially, the plan was for this to be all ad supported, for this to be an ad supported model. And so, one thing that was absolutely true back then was that Spotify saw its competition as piracy, not anything else. And so, if you could get pirates to switch to this thing, well, how do you do that? Well, it has to be faster, it has to be better, and it has to be the same price as piracy initially. And I think that's really what gave Spotify the leg up. There'd been streaming services before, Napster, the legal version, Rhapsody, I think was out already. Whatever Beats became, I think that was out before, or what was before Beats. And so these things were like you'd had streaming, you just hadn't had this combination of like speed and model, and then other things like
Interesting.
starting in the Nordics, moving
Mm-hmm.
to the UK, later doing the US, like lots of things. Some of them lucky, some of them very intentional, but all probably a part of why that succeeded versus other ones.
Yeah, all success seems to have a little bit of all of that. I guess good decisions and also really, really good luck. I mean, I see some similarities to why Facebook worked and it wasn't Friendster or MySpace that we're all using. Granted, there's much better options than Facebook nowadays in my mind, but it's a juggernaut. And there was 10, 15 Facebooks before Facebook, and
Yeah.
it's really, really powerful and beautiful to hear your perspective on why Spotify worked out. Curious, I mean, feel free to move past this, or talk about it if you feel inclined. Uh, Now that you don't work at Spotify, did you have a perspective or an opinion on them starting to get more interested in the live music industry via ticketing, team that they had, and doing concerts themselves? And then I think as of recently, the signal, though there's not been a press release or an explanation that I'm aware of, but the signal is they cut that and they went back to their core competency. Yeah. Any perspective on that one?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the challenge, obviously, like there's a couple of things. Spotify, since, from an economic point, since they go public, you're always going to have this really challenging thing where the record labels are always going to take the majority of the pie. And so as a business, Spotify, to continue to grow, it has to find new ways of adding additional revenue, preferably ones that don't go straight out, 70% doesn't go straight out the door. And even on a long enough time frame, if you have more leverage like that number doesn't change that dramatically, right? So they're going to try different things, whether you're talking about podcasts, whether you talk about audiobooks. Live and connecting people to live music seems like a really obvious one, right? And I think the thing that I'd say, well, like I didn't fully, I knew kind of I knew some people working like in and around that and didn't have any inside info on like how they were doing it, but I knew what they were trying to get into overall. And it makes a lot of sense. The fact that they might be stepping back from it, which is also what I've heard, and some of the layoffs really impacted that team, doesn't mean that it won't come again. Like I saw last week, couple of weeks ago, like they announced music videos in Spotify. I swear that's like the fifth time Spotify have announced music videos. Like I was there for two of them. Like I'm being, I'm exaggerating, but like there are a number of things that have been tried that didn't necessarily work in the format and the way that they worked it. For me,
Yeah.
what is undeniable, and I think this is actually the biggest like letdown, not just of Spotify, but other streaming services and other like new model distribution of media and art and whatever is, you know, these platforms have not enabled a better creator to fan relationship
Mm,
almost at all. Anything that
mm,
is there is peanuts relative to what could be. Like,
yeah.
we were talking back in, we were, like, hey, like imagine like even if you only had a certain amount of messages, kind of stuff that like SoundCloud have been trying to do recently, like why don't we let these people message their fans, get offers in front of them, get this, like the amount of data that they have. And while some of that stuff has been done, it's always been done with the very intentional like platform protection. Like we are in the middle of this and we will maintain that ownership. There is none of these platforms want you to go, none of them that are huge want you to go direct to your audience. And I think that's the opportunity when you think about live or whatever. Again, like, we have with ROSTR, we show you the top 50 cities from Spotify, and it's one of our most like looked at features on the platform because we have agents and promoters and managers and everybody everywhere trying to understand where are these fans, right? But it's also bullshit because you can only get the top 50 cities. They won't give out any more information than that. They want you to go to Spotify for artists for it. So
Mm,
you can't build these tools. And again, it's
mm,
not specifically Spotify. They're doing more on that than others. But like how much more efficient could the industry be if we had, you know, better access to that data, but more than that, more access to those fans. Now, the argument on the platform side is always going to be, well, look what happens when you give people access to spam. It's going to drive people off.
mm,
Like, how do you protect this? And I completely agree. But there's been a lot of innovation in lots of different areas. And that direct to fan stuff is just not one that these big guys have taken on, whether that's again Spotify or the YouTubes or the Apple Musics. And I think there's so many reasons for it. It's very difficult to do. I understand why they haven't done it. I still wish that they had.
privacy concerns too.
Right.
especially with like the, the EU kind of stuff. I can't
So,
remember the acronym for what the
so many,
data
I mean, so
protocols you
many
have to
things.
follow. Yeah.
Privacy, taxes, like I mean, it is not easy to do. Spam, like that, it's not easy to do, but I
There's
don't
got to
feel like there's
be,
been a real effort for it.
yeah, and I hear you about spam. As soon as you said that, I was like, oh yeah, makes a lot of sense. There's got to be middle ground between spam and just kind of using the in-app notifications that really aren't doing it yet. For the record,
Yeah.
I really am just a giant fan of Spotify. I mean, I use it every single day. I think it's an extremely innovative product. It's an amazing story. I learned more a lot just from talking about it with you. From my perspective, when I saw them getting into live, I thought it was exciting, but I kind of had always hoped that they would just be like the kayak of concerts, and I thought it was interesting they were trying to build like a primary ticketing, and I don't know if it ever got to that, but when I heard that, I was like, oh man, it's a crowded space. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of folks like throwing around money to win contracts. Um, it's not in a space that I would exactly want to play in, but at the same time, like what Spotify is so good at is, you know, knowing who's listening to the music. So if they could just be a marketing resource to send people to concerts and really focus on that, I mean, I think there's a real opportunity for them to be, yeah, once again, the kayak. And who cares where the ticket buyer buys the ticket in the end or who produces the barcode? But
Shareholders do
something
though.
has to happen with that. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like they have the keys to the kingdom.
But I think that's the thing, right? And again, this isn't, you know, this is applied to any
The
of these
shareholders do. I heard you say
large
that.
tech,
Well,
yeah,
good
these
point.
large tech players.
Yeah,
Like, I mean, like,
yeah.
look, what,
But they're
like
gonna make
kayaks.
money off of it though. The kayaks a big
Yeah,
play.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
sure. But I mean, like kayaks selling like, these high margin products, is maybe not flights, hotels, whatever. There's a lot to take out of the middle. Like, what do you take? Like, there's already so many people in the middle of a ticket, right? And what do you, so like, when you're looking at, you got to put yourself in a perspective. And again, like this is, you can look at it from Spotify's perspective, post IPO, you've got to do one of two things, probably two of two things, right? You've got to improve your gross margin on your core product, which is very hard to do, but you have to try. And the second thing is you've got to introduce more revenue streams, obviously many other things, because you've got to expand that business. The market wants you to continually grow. And so, if you look at something like that in live, it's like, okay, well, great. Like, how much money are these ticketing companies making? Good businesses, right? But on the whole, you've got to be looking at, okay, well, what are they revenue wise every year now? I don't know, 10 billion or something like that. Any products have to have that kind of scale to be worth it for the company, right? So, like, being the kayaks of tickets, and interestingly enough, before I joined Spotify, I was playing around with building a kayak for tickets in. I was in this, I had this startup, and one of the things we looked at was becoming some kind of aggregator, Songkick style, for tickets and selling tickets. And when we looked at it, we looked at the market, and it was kind of nuts. Like, if you sold every, with the affiliate fees that were the affiliate fees at the time, okay, no platform leverage, large platform leverage, which Spotify might have, but like if you sold every ticket in the UK, which is where it was at the time, like your total TAM on the revenue, like selling every ticket, was in the millions, right? Because there isn't really a great affiliate market on it. So then you've got to get in the middle of it. So I guess the point is, like, yes, there is incentive from a user perspective, right? But users might be more engaged if they can also buy tickets, and that's a cool service. And
Totally.
artists will love it if there's more tickets being sold. But unless you're in the middle of it and you're primary, can you make enough money for it to be
Yeah, that's a
worth
fair
it for a
point.
$25 billion company? Probably not.
Yeah, and then there's the like the bands in town of the world, which shout out Fabrice. Like there's some good services out there for sure. I mean, bands in town probably
Yeah.
the best that I'm aware of. The
Yeah.
the
And they
best
just
one
did
I'm
that.
aware of.
They just did that deal with Spotify, right? So like Fabrice, big fan of those guys. And
Yeah.
they're now in
Sorry, what's the
Spotify.
deal with Spotify? Oh, their bands in town is in
Yeah.
Spotify.
Yeah, bands in town, Spotify
Ooh,
now.
I
Yeah.
gotta.
So
I wasn't aware of that. Interesting.
yeah, they don't know if they replaced Songkick or if Songkick's still there, but yeah, bands in town, and Spotify now.
Well, just to
Now
put a cap on this topic, it's a fun side channel, but Amazon tried to get into ticketing many years ago, and I wonder if some of what these publicly traded companies bump into is the top end of the market, which might be seen as the most lucrative end of the market, is pretty aggressively locked up. Um, Some might say it's unfair. Some may float the monopoly word out there. But whatever you want to call it, there's ticketing contracts that just are immovable with, the top end of the market and the bottom of the market. There's sharks in the water, 10, 15, 20 ticketing companies competing for, the bottom of the pyramid, which is still, very valuable as you were saying it. So I think I would assume big publicly traded companies have trouble putting the product resources needed to compete for
Can
club
you hear my
ticketing.
dog snoring?
No.
Do I need to wake him up? He's like sitting here like having like snoring really loudly. It might be on the
No.
mic. I can
No.
like wake him up if he has. Oh, he's dreaming now. Great. So,
That's a cue to
let me
move on. This ticketing conversation is
yeah.
overplayed, but yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know. That's my assumption is like these big publicly traded companies. It's like an upside down pyramid. If they could put a little bit of product work and compete at the top of the market, they would probably do it, but instead they have to do a huge amount of product work at the lower end of the market, and it's just they start doing the math, and it's like it goes into the too hard bucket likely. But I
Yeah.
don't know. You agree with that?
I think so. And again, like, like Spotify on hard, like they're quite good at cutting stuff off when it's not working. I mean, like, look, they had the Spotify Direct, very similar thing, right? Where they were trying to essentially be a distributor. And, I was in those rooms when we were starting it out, and there was like a lot of product people like, wait, so oh, we're gonna have to pay like hundreds of thousands of artists in like 180 different countries around the world, and like, and then you start to like realize like, oh shit, okay, like, so yeah,
Fun
it's interesting. I
combo.
think, yeah, and look, I mean, like lots of these like, look, there's also a trend right now, a more macro trend that you know tech companies have gone, full 180 since, and everyone's investors wants to see them cutting staff and cutting projects
Yep.
and
Yep.
being lean and so, like when you're doing that, I guess you got to look at, okay, well, which are working and which aren't. And this isn't the last we're going to see of it. It's it's a definitive like trend right now. And I think that sucks, and maybe we talk about it a bit if we talk about jobs by roster at all, but like, the layoffs, and they're seeing layoffs followed by record profits, and everyone kind of like gets, but it's the way things are right now. And
It's a
doesn't,
weird, I mean, macroeconomics is bizarre because we live in the micro, but these macroeconomics, these tides impact us in a huge way. And I think there's a really big tide that's happening, and it's going to take 5 to 10 years to sort out. And maybe we're a year into it. Maybe it's just getting started. Who knows? But it's COVID. It's 10 years of inflation. Sorry, not 10 years of inflation. It's 10 years of zero interest rates, which has led to inflation. Tech was a lot of the benefit of the 0% interest rates because people just had to put their money on businesses that had potential to grow, and that's all changed now. You throw AI into the mix, and it's a very, very interesting time macroeconomically. There's a couple wars going on around the world that's messing up the supply chain even more. Cocoa's through the roof. Anyway, UFOs are flying around. It's crazy times.
yeah.
I joked to you and said when we did this podcast, we were going to talk about the CIA and UFOs and all these things. And you very cleverly said you want to talk about, you're down to talk about 3-level agencies all day long. So on that note, let's jump back into roster. All right. So the stage is set. Jumping back, you're working
Yeah.
at Spotify. It's makes complete sense. The world is transitioning from, physical record sales to online. You're experiencing the physical, you've got your hands in the live music industry via Spotify. You see what an amazing product is doing. You can't get a hold of Tool's manager, and bam, and why'd you leave? Why do you want to start something?
Um, I was kind of cooked there by that point. Like I was ready. I'd gone through the super interesting, at least for me, part of it. Like, I did like a different job every 6 months, and the company was changing, and then it quickly got not quickly, but I guess I kind of realized one day I was like, okay, great, like this probably isn't the stage of business I'm that interested in, and they probably were like I'd probably delivered what I needed to, and probably had a fair amount of like I guess I wasn't even first wave, but like second wave OG syndrome. I
Yeah.
was just ready to move on. And my the initial plan when I left, there was in fact two things. One, this was like fairly early on, but I was going to look at creating the team that I had at Spotify, which was this awesome team of people who were like smart, connected, really delivering value across like these relationships and doing cool stuff at South by, and another person being like, really hot on the economics. And I was going to leave and try to take a few of these people and start like an agency, like a mercenary version of that, because I figured
Mm,
like, the industry was growing. There's going to be more companies, but not all of them are going to have the knowledge or the capital to create their own teams that do this, but they're going to need to do it. So like smaller DSPs, tech companies, all of that kind of stuff. And so as I was kind of like planning this out and thinking about it, one of the things I just increasingly came down to was like, well, if you build an agency, it's like kind of hard to build value outside of the people. I was like, but what's really valuable here is this like data about who's who. So what I started thinking about was like, as we do this, if we build this like killer proprietary database of who's who in the music industry that we have access to, it'll make us better than other companies trying to do this kind of consultancy thing, but also would have this value in the data. And then I was like, well, why don't we just do the data side of it instead of the agency side and build a service that has the best graph of the music industry, the best set of connections of who's who in the music industry. And it was very much like, look, if I do this, I solve this problem that I had at Spotify, and I assume other people have this problem. I was very wrong about, not very wrong, I was pretty wrong about who were the first people that would have that problem. I can go into that. But it was very much like, hey, like I can't find tools manager, so other people can't find tools manager. But on top of that, there was this like slightly, I guess, if I'm pretending to be smarter than I am, part of it where I'm like, well, I can see from inside Spotify how fragmented stuff is getting. We've gone from just in the last couple of years, I was there with like, I don't know what the numbers were, but like, there being 5,000 artists who had more than 50,000 monthly listeners to there being 50,000 artists that had more than 50,000 monthly listeners. I don't know what that number is now, above 100, but it's a lot of artists. And part of my thesis was, look, the music industry is changing from this pretty small set of professionals to a much wider, fragmentation of it. I don't think it's happened nearly as much as streaming had the potential to create, but it is definitely happening. We've gone from a world where, probably talking about 10 to 15,000 professional artists in the world a decade ago that you could call professional, like they probably did it mostly for their main job, to where we are now, where that number is easily 100,000 plus. And depending on how you want to frame it, more than that. And so my thought was like, look, if I'm having trouble now, like what's going to happen when you 10x the amount of artists that are involved in this and their relationships? And so that was kind of like the long-term view of it. So, I started pitching it and to a few of the people that I'd, you know, tried to convince not to pull their artists off of Spotify and built relationships with, and a few awesome people threw some money in, and we started. That was end of 2018. Hired a team January 2019, and amazingly at the time, um, a guy that who I knew at Spotify, a guy called Tracy Chan, who's since gone on to run content at SoundCloud and just joined an AI company. I forget the name. He introduced me to his CTO from his previous company, a guy called Adam Watson, who'd been working at Spotify. I didn't know him and was leaving, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm moving to California and looking to do something." And we've been business partners, and he's a tech guy, and I'm the kind of talk guy and everything else, and we've been doing that for 5 years since then.
oh, divine providence. That's amazing.
It was super lucky. My God, like people are like, how did you find your technical co-founder? And I was like, got very lucky. The timing was insane, and just a great, very good engineer as well, and a very good friend. So very lucky.
Great.
But yeah,
I
so
mean,
we started.
it shows in the product. For those that haven't checked it out, I mean, I'm such a fan in terms of like what y'all the way that you are approaching the product. Does that come from both of you, or I mean, I see a lot of Spotify DNA in it, but
Yeah, I think. Look, I don't know that there's some. I mean, like there's a lot of things we try not to do with that. Like, I mean, I don't. We probably don't want this to go into like kind of a product chat, but like Spotify is always takes too long to do shit, and there's a lot of product decisions and lots of A/B tests. We don't have that culture here at all. I don't think you can afford to have that culture
It's
in
gonna say you're
the music
smaller.
industry.
Yeah.
I mean, look, when you're talking about billions of people, great, like
Yeah,
test something for 2 years. We're talking about a very small group of people, like
totally.
just throw it in there, right?
Yeah,
So
stay lean for sure. Stay lean and
yeah,
fast and as much as
yeah.
you possibly can. And I'm sure you'll hit scale. The more and more you hit scale, you already have, but those problems creep up, but you got to take advantage of that.
I mean, yeah,
We can.
Karen.
There's so many places we could go. I gotta ask some questions. You and I were talking offline a little bit before we started, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that there was actually a little bit of like a foreshadowing of what you saw at Spotify with some artists resisting and then eventually saying, all right, you know what, this is better for the world. And you experienced this at Rosser too, didn't you?
Yeah, a little bit. I
Not
mean,
necessarily artists, but like some resistance that broke through, right?
yeah, like look, I was like, hey, like this seems so obvious this was needed, right? And so I started going around, and most of the people I knew who had money and invested in stuff were managers who I'd again talked to over the last few years. And I'd sit down, I'd be like, hey, like this is really needed, and then they're like, yeah, but and I remember one in particular who went on to invest anyway. He's like, yeah, we need this, but everyone is gonna fucking hate you. And I was like, so, and this was not the only person who said that. Like many people, like you are
Like for
not going to be.
spam or what? Like why?
No,
Why?
no. So this was like, so I would dig into that, right? Like, as you're supposed to do when you're doing all the customer side. Yeah, like why? And they're like, well, look, like if and this was the my favorite thing I heard. I was like, well, if people's rosters are like online, everyone is just going to be poaching the whole time. And I
Mm.
remember hearing that and thinking, yes, this is great because this is just not. It's just like if the only thing stopping someone stealing your artist is them knowing you have that artist, right? Like anyone capable of stealing your artist can know who it is. Like, right? Like it's not just some like random kid's going to come along and steal your artist. It's going to be another big manager, and they know who your artists are anyway, right? That's just not the problem. So I remember hearing these kind of objections,
Yeah.
and then other ones like, we don't want to be it's not about us, it's about our artists, which I also love because if it's not about you, then be the face, right? Take the
Yeah.
business inquiries. And so, like, all of these objections that I kept hearing about why people would hate us taking information from online, aggregating it, and putting it on the web, all of them felt like um, cultural objections as opposed to real objections.
Hmm.
And I felt like if we did it right, and at the same time, I started thinking more and more about, okay, great, well, they're not, you can't ignore those objections because they're important,
Yes.
right? So we did a couple of things. Like when we launched, roster was invite only. You had to request an invite. We asked you to use your corporate email if you had one. And I literally approved every single person that came into the site for the first year of the site, which of course
Wow.
made growth really, really difficult. Was
Yeah, could you do
really
anything else in the day or?
I mean, it was super easy. I had a process set up, and like I would,
Yeah.
like it would have, I had a process set up that would identify stuff that might be a bit weird, like Gmail accounts, and I had
Hmm.
whitelisted. And so I made it easy, but I
Mm.
also saw every single customer that signed up, and we didn't have that many anyway. So it wasn't thousands of people at the beginning. It was
Okay, fair
literally
enough.
drips and drabs, right? But I think doing that was really important because it allowed us to go to these people and say, hey, we are making sure these people are professionals in the industry. And it just was, I think, the right way to do it. And then because the other thing that changed when we were doing is I was like, great, we're going to build this thing and everyone's going to come and fill out their information. Everyone's like, no, they're not. Music industry is not going to do that. And that's something where I was like, yeah, no, they will. And now I'm pretty convinced, like, in large part, it's not going to happen for some time. We are going to have to continue to be the middleman. So
So all the
when
data, yeah, let me ask that. So how do you get the data on the platform? It's just it's an aggregator in entirety, or
no,
how
so
does it work? Yeah.
like the first 1,000 artists, I was sending this newsletter before newsletters were a thing, really. I would send as I was fundraising and I was trying to keep myself busy. I would every Thursday night I'd stay up late and I would find out who the managers were for New Music Friday on Spotify. And on Friday morning, I would send an email for artists that might not be signed. And I ended up getting like, I don't know, there's a couple of thousand people who received that email. Um, but it meant that I started building a database. So by the time I hired the team, I already had 1,000 artists and their management companies, and then I got those rosters for those off their websites if they had them. Um, so the first, when we launched, I think we had 15,000 artists in the database, about 1,000 management companies, all built by hand, aggregated from publicly available information. And for the first year, I would say that remained the case for 95%. We would take inputs like playlists, festivals, we would find those artists. If we found the company, we would then get all of the artists from those companies. And we built it very hand. But I would say when we launched, we already had parity with existing players because that was easy information to get. It was all the known artists. And then we built ways of finding out information and learned about it, and we grew the database. That was back then. Now I would say that the amount of, we call that, so that was research. That's us finding information, putting it into the database. I would say that the amount of data that goes into our platform now by research is more like 10%. And 90% of the data comes directly from our stakeholders. So, every major agency we have a direct line to, they send us information, all of the big management companies. And this is, I think, the most fascinating part of it is that
via like API connections, or is
no,
it
it's
kind of
so it's simple
spreadsheets
and
and stuff?
dumb and
Yeah.
cheap. It's like email and spreadsheets, right?
Yeah.
And type forms. So, because this
Yeah.
is the thing.
How did you get them to give a damn though and keep sending you the spreadsheets?
So in my brain, because I'm kind of like tech and like whatever, I was like, great, we're going to create this thing, and people are going to think it's so useful. They start giving us information, and it didn't
There's a
happen.
real chicken and an egg problem here, you know? I'm very curious to unpack this more.
Yeah. So look, I mean, we saw the early stages of this. So we launched our alpha, which we called a beta at the time, but then needed to launch a beta, so we rephrased it as an alpha. We launched in October 2019 with just a post on my personal Instagram, which I think still today I have like 1,000 followers or something. So it wasn't big, but everyone who knew me from Spotify signed up, and we had this spike, and it was great and it was cool. And then, you know, we just hit this, like, we just didn't have any money for marketing. We just hit this wall. We didn't have a plan for marketing. I just thought, hey, everyone's going to kind of come, and that typical kind of first time founder stuff. And it was just like, it was cool. We were testing, we were getting feedback, but we weren't really getting any users. It was tiny, like 100 people a day. And in December, we ran this thing where we knew we had all this data about management companies, and we also had how many Spotify monthly listeners they had. And I pulled together this like infographic which showed the top 10, 20 management companies in the world, which I think like probably the first time anyone had ever been able to do that, because the way we built our database is, it's a relational database, but it allows you to say, okay, great, like let's look at this management company, let's say Red Light, let's look at their 350 artists that are connected, and let's take data to do with those artists and roll it up and say that's Red Light's audience. We're the first, I think, first database that existed like that could start ranking management companies and agencies in a way that like record labels have been able to do for years with sales, but no one has been able to do it. Anyway, we sent this infographic out to our tiny mailing list, and almost nobody saw it except for all of the managers who were either on it or not on it. And we got some emails like that were not like
You're
the
missing
happiest
out.
about it, but
Yeah.
all of a sudden we started getting emails saying, you don't have my artist, you don't have this artist, why have you not counted this?
Man, it's
And
really similar to I actually keep going. Keep
no,
going.
no, no. So
Please keep going. I'm
so
like
like
a side
you,
tangent.
I'm not going to say that I didn't know that, like that was kind of the point of it, right? Was to create this incentive. But so few people saw it, but all of a sudden we were getting emails from these managers. And then that was in December, a couple of months after we launched. In January at the time, we were at this tiny little office at Santa Monica Airport. It was literally the closest possible office to my house, so I could walk there, which always looks weird in LA walking to work. And we had this tiny little office, and I remember we were sitting there one afternoon. It was probably a Wednesday afternoon, and the Coachella lineup dropped. And I turned to this guy George, who's been on our team. He'll be 5 years this year. He's a hero and is as responsible for roster as a couple of other people on our team. And I turned to him and I said, "Hey, do you think we have like how much of this data do you think we have for the roster for the Coachella lineup? How many do we think we know their agents? Let's take a look. And again, because of the
This is
way
an
we built,
incredible graphic that you
right?
launched. Yeah.
So like, so,
Really brilliant.
but we were sitting there and he said, look, let me take a look. And so we, again, the way we built our data and the tools that we use, we were able to pipe in the artists and look. And I think at the time we had 50% of the artists, so maybe 120 artists. We had agency info for 60 of them. And it was like, okay, cool. Let's try to get the rest. So we spent, a couple of hours trying to get agency info for the rest of the artists. And I was going to put together some pie charts, basically. And the pie charts were going to show like which agency had booked the most artists. And like right at the last minute before we put it in an email with some other info, I was like, oh, what would be cool is if we change the poster so it's the agencies that represent them. And so like, like I don't know what we're doing. We don't have a designer. Like, we still don't. We still just we do it ourselves. We pulled up Sketch and I kind of bastardized it and figured it out. And we put this thing together and we sent it out in our email. And for those who haven't seen it, like if you go to ROSTR's Instagram, we're just at roster.cc on Instagram. It's one of our pin posts this year's one.
Yeah, I'll put it up on the
Um,
podcast.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
it's an
it's,
amazing image.
it's we sent it we sent it out in this email,
How did you get
and
the font and everything?
I think even the first one, I think we had it. There's a font called Type
Okay, it's
that
like
somebody's
closest
created
to, but not
for this.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think somebody's created it for this reason, like because people wanted to do it. And people have been, there was that, I think at the time there was a one that you could auto generate with your own lineup. And so like it wasn't like weak, but it was this combination of the agencies. Anyway, I didn't even think it was that interesting. We put it in an email with some other stuff and we sent it out. And then like it started blowing up. Like it genuinely started blowing up in a way that's so much smaller than it does now. But people started sharing it. It was super unique. And then I started getting emails from, my career at Spotify was all managers. I knew a few agents here and there, but I didn't have relationships with the agencies like necessarily. And I just started getting these emails from these agencies that were like, to paraphrase it, like really polite, like, who the fuck are you and what are you doing? Like that was like basic. It wasn't that. It was like, hey, we saw this thing. Who are you? Do you want to come in? And I like within like that next week, I was at like, all the agencies I went in and I spoke to different teams there. And like everyone was like, kind of, what are you guys doing? And then I kind of explained and, this, that, and the other. And again, like fast forward, a few years from there, all of those are our customers. All of them use the platform. All of them give us data. And I don't think we would be here if we hadn't come up with that stupid idea for the poster, because it it
Pivotal
put us
moment.
into yeah, it put us into the agency world. And today I mentioned to you before we spoke, like I wasn't even thinking about the live world when I built ROSTR. I was thinking about
Yeah.
managers and brands in particular. But today, like ROSTR's core audience, like the ones that have dived in hard, and it now makes a lot of sense why I can say why I think that. But promoters, agencies, the live world is by far biggest usage of ROSTR. And I don't think we would have that
Well, it's a
or any
day-to-day
of this.
need for
Yeah,
them.
or any of those.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, the way it makes a lot of sense. Like rosters are bigger. There's a lot more things, there's a lot more interactions.
So
So
that's a really brilliant strategy. So by putting these like, these infographics out, agencies want to be a part of it. That got the, agencies managers, their artists as a result, that got the ball rolling. And is it, and I think, is it still a huge part of, why they keep submitting, or is it now, did that feed the network effects? And now there's like, they're benefiting from the promoters being on there, and it's just like the ball is rolling down the hill. I assume you still do these graphics for a reason.
yeah, look, I think it's a couple of things. When we did, I think the coolest thing about them is that I think we've normalized something that was a little bit like weird behind the curtain in the music industry. And I think we've
Yeah.
done this with our hottest signings as well. Like obviously people celebrate signings, but like we've kind of created this like event out of them in a way that I don't think was necessary before. And like when we first did that Coachella thing, not everyone was happy. They were like, hey, this isn't information that the industry shares. Now
That's
we
some
so
like mafia stuff there.
like well no, but it's just like but again, it's that cultural thing, right? Like it's that cultural thing. Now it's crazy. Like every major agency and every agency now puts out their own posters with other like everything else. Like it's become this thing.
Interesting.
We've
Yeah.
like, and I'm not saying it's just us, but like it's part of this behavioral change, and we can go back and talk about it with the rosters being online as well. But initially, it's like this, and I don't mean this word, I don't mean this in a bad way at all. We think of those things and how they work as what I describe as ego incentive, right? And there is a lot of ego incentive in the music
Mm.
industry. And I don't
Hmm.
mean this in a judgmental way. The music industry, unlike like there isn't a lot of great ways to um like celebrate, like there isn't always best ways to like understand where people stand, and ego incentives, awards, and other things are important in the industry for better or for worse. And early
And
on
then
with
it's
the
also
Coachella thing,
business, right? Like, it
yeah,
leads to business as well. Yeah.
exactly right. And so you have that, but then you also have we did the world's leading artist management companies, right? So we followed up on that first management report. We did a much bigger one, a much more detailed one, and that starts to create. And again, but where I think what's really interesting is if you go back 2-3 years as we've been doing this, I would say like 80% of the reason that people were giving us this information was we very cleverly tugged on those ego strings. Not intentionally at first, but then we certainly played on it. I would say now, like it is still important and people still do it. Like, we used to have to get all the data. Now everyone's, the day before Coachella, we've got like, yeah, everyone sends us like information the day it drops, like, hey, we're representing these artists. Um, but I think we've now switched significantly where a lot of the incentive with roster is now really where I want it to be, which is value incentive, right? It's a true utility for people. And you hear these stories. We had this story. We're really bad at telling them to the world, but like I had a call from a manager who said, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know you guys featured one of our artists. We do artist features, their editorial. We featured one of our artists. As a result of that, an agent had hit us up and asked us to support one of their shows, one of their artist shows in LA. So, and he'd seen us on roster. So we went, we played the show, and there was an agent at the show from a major agency who ended up signing the artist, and we're now doing a headline tour. And of course, the artist is the one that's done all of that, right? And the team. But people are starting to have these seeds and these discoveries through roster, and we're creating real value, real money for people on the platform. And that's much more sustainable than are we tickling people's egos, right? Like that's important in the industry, but what's really important is like, are you creating value? And I think the thing that is so important, and people ask me like, why are they giving you this info? Because they use the platform.
Yeah. Mm.
When
Mm.
you look at our user list on a daily basis, it isn't like it's a lot of assistants and it's a lot of associates, it's a lot of junior level, but it isn't just. It's like every major agent, every major promotion company in the world, every major manager or like significant managers in the world are on there every day themselves. And so if you're using the platform to
That's
find this
amazing.
information, you've got to assume that other people are, right? And so like, okay, cool. Like I don't think we've done a great job. So like, stuff that we should do is we should have on platform messaging, right? So that we get the credit. Like if I find you through there, it should be on roster. So they go, oh shit, they found me on roster and then they gave me a check. I'll give that. But for various reasons, we don't have online messaging. So we're creating a ton of value that we never get credit for. And we need to do a better job of that. But we know
Interesting.
it's happening.
Interesting. Um, on app messaging, curious to talk about that at some point. I'm just gonna write that down for later. Let me zoom out. I just want to say, I met you, I think, either as you were starting roster or shortly before, and I don't know. I just kind of assumed that you were gonna succeed and that it was gonna work out, and I thought it was a great idea,
God, at least
but
there's one of us. I guess I guess I did at the beginning, and then it wasn't so
entrepreneurs got
sure
to
for a
believe in
while.
each other. I was like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, that's gonna work. And you're from Spotify, definitely. But it's so funny. Like I saw the Coachella infographic came out, and as an outsider, I was like, oh, innovative, cool, great look. I had no idea it was such a catalyst to spark your success. Now I'm gonna ask a bit of a provocative question. You get all these people signed up, you get folks using the app. You mentioned creating value. Part of running a business, obviously, is extracting value. and rightfully so for the service that you're providing. I deal with this at Prism. And I think, did roster start off free and then you moved to paid, and how has that journey been, and where are you at in that journey? And yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to open a window. One
Oh,
sec.
go ahead. Yeah. Take your time.
That that LA sun finally came out and got warm in here.
I know the feeling.
Yeah, it's funny because I guess I mentioned this a bit with Spotify. Like, one of the other things when we were researching competitors before as we were building this is, I was on a competitor's site and I saw a friend of mine who's a manager, and on their page, like everything was wrong. Like everything was wrong on the competitor's page. So I called him up and I was like, "Hey, do you know like all your info is wrong on that?" And he was like, "So?" And I was like, "You don't care?" He's like, "Why?" And it's like, this is really interesting. I was like, he doesn't care because he can't see it. He doesn't use it. So like part of our thing was always like, this needs to be free so that the people who own the data can see the data so they can care about the data. And it needs to be free to grow and all of that kind of stuff, right? So, initially I saw this much more as like LinkedIn style situation. Look, we're going to keep it free, we're going to grow, everyone's going to use it. But as things happen, global pandemics come along and change your plans a little bit. And so,
We got an
sitting at
hour into the pod without talking about COVID.
yeah, I know.
Anyway, keep
We're at
going.
that stage though. This was that Coachella, that first
I
Coachella one,
literally
the
had
one
that thought. I was like, holy shit, I'm doing a podcast without talking about COVID. Anyway, keep going. All good.
that
All
the
good. Such
Coachella
a
one, we
freak.
were just the first one that was the Coachella that never happened.
Oh yeah.
And so it was literally like, 6 weeks after this or whatever, we were sitting in that same office, and I was like, guys, I think the world's about to like. I was pretty bearish on it from the beginning. I was like, this is going to be fucked. Excuse my language again. Um, and I shut the office down. I went home and we shifted our strategy. And I said, listen, guys, I don't think we're going to be able to continue to raise capital. Like, and ironically, like as the pandemic went on, companies were able to raise capital. But I said to the team, listen, I want to be in a position where, we've got
Back
X
to
amount
like
of,
peak 0% interest rate and
yeah,
play money getting injected into the world, macroeconomic shifts. We're paying for it now, but
yeah.
yeah, people were raising money during a pandemic.
At the
Lots of
same
it.
time, yeah, at the same time, like, look, hey guys, like, hey investors, like, June, like, whatever, I need you to put some money into my B2B music industry app that has like a couple of hundred users, like, it's and no revenue. Didn't feel like a smart position to be in.
Yeah, it
So
was feast or famine for sure, and depending on where you got caught in the Great Divide. But anyway,
yeah,
keep going, keep going. Yeah, yeah.
so we look. I called the team and I said, look, we're gonna have to run super lean. We were 4 people at the time. We're gonna have to run super lean, and we're gonna have to build a pro service that we can charge for, and hope that people are back to work by the time we've built it. And like everything, it took us longer. It took us over a year to build it. So I think we started in like March, and it took us like till the next June to really launch it. Um, and then we did, a couple of deals. Just we launched it just as live came back the first time, and it was super interesting because during that year away, the major agencies had fired a bunch of people or furloughed a bunch of people, and a lot of those agents went off and started new agencies, and we tracked all of those new agencies. I wrote this article called the COVID diaspora, and the major agency landscape, where we tracked like 25 of these agencies and how they were doing. And so by the time the industry started to come back, everyone was like, I don't know who's representing who and where is so and so now. And so we just all of a sudden had this wave of agents and promoters who wanted to pay for the platform. And I say wave is a tiny amount, but it was enough to keep us going for a few more months. And then, you know, there was this whole period where we were quiet, and then I bought it back, which we can talk about if we have to.
I
But
was gonna say that was a
you know,
interesting rabbit hole, but we can go back to it if it's
yeah.
natural.
So like skipping a chapter to maybe come back to like I then sold the business at the end of the pandemic or towards the end of the pandemic, and then I like skipped the chapter for now. I then bought the business back. We then bought the business back in February last year, and when we did that, to go back to your original question, was free and paid and so on. we still, at this point, we had a paid tier and we had a free tier, and the free tier was very generous. Like you could do almost anything on the platform except look at like email addresses and contact details, which are pretty easy to find. And when I bought it back, I made the decision. I was like, look, I love being able to give this, like everyone have access to this, but you know, people are just not, people are using this a crazy amount. They're getting a ton of value out of it, and they've never paid us a dollar. And, it was, and I'm talking like, we had customers who had like, you know, 5, 6, 700 sessions a year using it 2, 3 times a
Yeah,
day, but they had no need to pay for it. So I said, look, we're going to have to create some leverage here. And so we introduced what we call like internally like free limits, which is you can still use the platform for free. You get 10 profile views a month. Any more than that, like we feel like, hey, like, you should subscribe to one of our plans, and we have discounts for young people, discounts for students, we have discounts for nonprofits, we do team
amazing.
deals.
It's very kind of you to do that.
And you know what? It changed the business. It changed the business trajectory. It's got us into a position where, we are, we're still investing quite a bit, but we're now a sustainable, proper business. And before it, I think we were struggling. We were still it's still a
Yeah, you're
startup.
trying
We're
to make
still
an idea
existential.
come to life and
Yeah.
playing to an investment market that has, was basically running on fumes through 0% interest, and a lot of people were doing the tech industry. Anyway, I want to take a moment to say, like, I guess to have your back on this one. I think as a society, we're shifting towards, people, users paying for their service directly. And, folks like, and I need to remind myself of this. If you're not paying for something and you're getting value out of it, you are the product. And what is going to happen to you if you are the product, right? And this is the problem that Facebook is having, Instagram is having. And, now all these like engineers out of San Francisco are like putting their brain power into having you as addicted to the apps as possible because they make money off of the advertisers, and it skews, it misaligns the incentives. It's just a much better world if you enjoy a service and you pay for it, and you pay a healthy portion of the value that you get from it. You shouldn't pay more than the value you get from it, but if you make $2 off a service and you pay a dollar for it figuratively, it's a great thing. It helps make that product sustainable. It helps keeps incentives aligned, and it doesn't make it so that you have to like go do advertising on the platform to like make, to as your main product. And I don't know if you do advertising or not, but by having people pay for it directly, you could just keep the service clean, and you get to keep servicing your
Mhm.
customer directly. Like at the end of the day, all these platforms based off of advertising, Facebook customers are the advertisers, so they have to appease the advertisers, and they're not appeasing the users as much. So anyway, I'm really glad you're
Yeah.
finding sustainability. I totally understand why you're setting up boundaries around how much you get out of the free system, and bravo, man. I mean, I think you're doing something really valuable for the world, and you deserve to stand on your own 2 feet, make a good living doing this. You and the people
Yeah. Thanks.
making
I
it
mean,
come to life.
look, the other side of it is like, I think, related to this, but also I think, like something that all, and this is spreading out, I guess, away from ROSTR, something that I'm increasingly talking about more publicly, and I've done this on panels when I can, is I think one of the biggest problems we have in music technology and music tech, and especially in the kind of world that we're in with B2B music technology, is how hard it is to get people to pay for something, right? And this is something that the music industry needs to. I don't know if it needs to figure it out. Will it figure it out? I don't know what it is. But one of the things I keep saying to people is like, when you're building in this space, it's really, really hard to get a lot of value out of it. And we've seen a ton of really interesting, good music tech startups either go bust because they couldn't raise another round because there wasn't the customers there, even though it's a great product that could dramatically improve the ecosystem. Or what is more common is they go much broader and they start trying to go after other. So like, like there's some like awesome like ad tech, and it's like, well, cool. Like why are you doing ad tech in music? Like do ad tech in like cosmetics. If your ad tech is great, like, and so you see this kind of like broadening of it. And what that tends to end up doing is it really means like we're going to try to make music at only a tiny part of our focus. And I think we've seen this quite a lot across the music industry. And I think a big,
Fantastic point.
a big part of that is, you know, the industry just isn't, it went through some pretty harrowing couple of decades with piracy when no one had any money, right? And I was talking to somebody the other night at a drinks thing, and they were saying, look, they pay for this piece of software that they basically run their agency on, right? And it's like it's all this like back office stuff. I forget what the software's called. It's like we pay for it, but it's like it's something like $1,500 a month. And I speak to people who are at other agencies. They're like, "Oh, how can you pay that?" And he's like, "It literally runs our business. It would take like 3 or 4 people doing this. It saves us a ton of money." But there's this mentality of like, you don't really pay for software. It's like, cool, we'll throw a party and spend 50K, but like this thing that's really important. And I think it's like a PTSD from the piracy years and whatever. But there isn't a lot. People don't spend a lot of money on technology in this industry, and I think that makes it really hard for ambitious startups, and I think it makes
Mm,
it a real
well put.
contradiction with the VC world. And so we've made a big shift in our business where I've said, listen, I don't want to go. I made this decision last year after we bought it back, and I said, look, I don't want to go and raise $2 to $3 million at some valuation that I probably have to sell as much larger than our current market, right? Like I probably have to sell the idea of like, great, we're going to do this in all these different industries, and put pressure on the business to probably broaden and dilute what we're doing today. And I think too much music tech has fallen into that trap. But there isn't a lot of other financing options. So it's like, do you do that or don't you do that? And I think that's a real challenge. So when we've created this thing where we're like, okay, great, we're growing slower, we're taking less risk, we're trying to be sustainable, but we're looking at a little bit more of a focus. And I think this is a little bit of the difference is instead of us trying to transition roster into this thing where, now we have sports and comedians and whatever. I'm not saying we won't do that, but what I'm much more interested in now is starting to find other ways that I can improve your life if your job is to work in the music industry. And how do we do that in a way that is capital efficient? And I hate this because it's like you say these words on podcasts and everyone sounds smarter than they actually are. Like I just mean it's very
Especially with your
difficult
accent.
to it's very difficult to invest. Like if I say first principles without like it being a joke, then just cut me off. But if you spend too much on these products in music, I think you're screwed. And because you can't return the value necessarily.
Yeah. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant point. I love it. Obviously, you're preaching to the choir with me. Being the CEO of Prism. I think at the end of the day, the more you spend, I think it is about trust. You're right. And and when a Prism or a roster, is asking for a specific price, like when that price is actually met and people step up and have so much deep appreciation for all of our customers, it allows me to then go put more and more resources into solving more problems for the industry. And at the end of the day, every single imaginable thing can be solved with software. But there's just a question of what's driving that, and we do live in a capitalist country, so yeah, you're right. Like the more money we can make inside of music, the more money we can invest in music, and vice
Mhm.
versa. And going deep instead of wide is really only a possibility if there is money to be shared. So it's a and anyway, that's a really, really brilliant perspective. I think this is a fun time to, to shift the conversation a little bit and to talk about some of the trends that we're seeing in the world. To end kind of on a fun note. The first obvious question that I have, and this is a bit of a segue, so kind of keeping us on the roster path. Are you utilizing AI? And we can start with roster. Your engineers Are your engineers benefiting from the use of AI? Mine certainly are. Are you thinking of any way to involve AI into the product? And then let's go a little bit broader and have some fun with like, is AI taking over the world?
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think I have a problem. I have about as many AI subscriptions now as I have like
I
streaming
know.
TV subscriptions. I'm like picking them up.
It's a gold rush.
Engineering's using it a lot. I don't think in the way that
Copilot.
Copilot, because it's speeding up a lot of stuff and it's kind of incredible. It's I was joking the other day that I find it kind of interesting. This is going to be a weird segue, but I'll try to bring it back. Like I'd love this. There's this theory that weirdly Michael Crichton created, the Jurassic Park author, called I think the Gell-Mann amnesia effect. Bear with me. Look it up. It's really cool. But basically the idea is like if you're reading you sit down in the morning to read a newspaper and you read some articles about a war in another country, politics in this country, and then you flip the page and it's a news article about something deeply. So in Michael Crichton's case, it's TV and film. He's like, you read this article and the author has got it so backwards that you can't even believe that they've written it down. They're so wrong. They're so wrong about this thing. It's like, I think
Stunk
it's
on them.
described as like, it's like rain coming off the ground. He's like, anyway, you get to the end of the article, you turn the page, and then you read about this other war with like complete confidence in the author. And so it's this concept that something really well, you can see all the gaps and the holes in it, but then you have this trust in other stuff. Now, I'm not like a conspiracy,
Interesting.
but what I've been thinking about it a lot with AI, because when I speak to say Adam or Lucas on our engineering team or whatever, and I talk to them about AI, they're like, yeah, it's super helpful, but it's nowhere near like really replacing engineers yet. And then like
Totally.
I see this stuff and I'm like, oh, you say nowhere near, but like it's gonna happen. Like you're gonna be able to do these things, and I see that. But then I turn the page and I go to like one of these like AI generative music sites, and I'm like, this is horrible.
Yeah.
Like there is
Yeah.
no way this music is ever gonna replace what's happening. And so it's really weird. It's almost the opposite of that. Like I can't get my head around like whatever pseudo whatever these AI. I listen to them and I'm like, this is horrible, horrible music. And I can't see it in the same way that they can't see how you could, but it's going to happen, right? Like I have no doubt. I hate the phrase like this is the worst it's ever going to be. It's unfortunately true. To answer your question more directly, like we're using it, like we already have a product. We have a product called Rody that is super like early basis. We basically use in this case OpenAI, but we're going to be switching to a model that has more access to more recent information. But we basically have a tab on an artist profile that gives you a bio, tells you about the history, recommends similar artists, gives you a tour history, and all by sending some prompts to AI. And this kind of goes back to where I talked about, like, yeah, I'd love to be in a position where I have somebody who sits and writes bios for every artist, but we can't afford to do that. Or even license them, and then you go to an all music and it's all out of date anyway. So we're using it to bring additional contextual information, and then on the back end we're using it a lot for helping us move faster. But I think that there is a really interesting thing with AI and products like ROSTR and going back to the costing. I think it introduces a democratization of this stuff that previously was the preserve of companies that could afford to have machine learning teams.
Yeah.
So, the easiest way that I say that this is like, obviously Spotify have been doing a lot of this for years, right? Not
Yeah.
necessarily Gen AI, but certainly
Recommendations. Yeah.
recommendations, Discover Weekly, all of this kind of stuff, right? They can do it because of the access that they have and to the data and the engineers. But like it isn't great, but you today can go to any number of models and say like, hey, I have this song. Can you recommend 10 similar
Yeah.
ones like it? So that intelligence is kind of like being somewhat divorced from scale and again, like large amounts of capital. And we can use it in our product without having to have huge scale, huge data, and huge capital. And that's going to be really, really interesting because we can start doing cool things for our customers that previously would just never have been efficient in our world.
You know, fun, beautiful conversation. It's cool that you're using it for your product. You did touch on kind of the Asimov slash Philip K. Dick kind of scenarios. I'll never mix those up again for the record. I felt
I might not even be right about. I think yeah, foundation is that one.
no,
Yeah.
I think you're totally right. Anyway, they were probably friends, who cares? But I think that we don't know what happens in the future with AI. There's an interesting part of the conversation of all the ways we can use it now. I'm curious how the industry is using it. I think folks are using it. They're playing with it. I agree with you. Like it's a nascent stage, and there's a lot of overhype around it. There's a lot of, and at the end of the day, it's helping people. It's not necessarily replacing meaningful jobs, at least from not what I'm seeing. I'm not sitting here thinking like I could take 20 engineers and do that work with 3 engineers now that I have Copilot. It's not even close to that. I'm still wanting more and more engineers personally to bring other things
Yeah.
to life. And we just don't know how far this thing will go, and if it continues to be like an iterative thing for us into the future. Like, software has always gotten easier and easier to create, and it's gotten more and more democratized. Like, you could say that with libraries, and you go from C++ to like, kind of modern frameworks that and now you have like Copilot. Like, it definitely seems quite iterative. Is it going to take a jump into the future where it's like general AI, and you have software going out there and like making products that humans couldn't make, or music that people couldn't make, or I don't know, like or movies, whatever. I mean, it just gets so much into science fiction, and we just don't know. We really genuinely don't know. Like, I think it's possible. I still personally have a lot of faith in like the world looking relatively the same in the next 10 to 20 years, even though it's going to iteratively get more and more impressive. And I think AI is going to play a bigger and bigger part in making our jobs more efficient. But will it take a turn at some point to displacing really, really good people? I certainly hope not. I'm not for that future. One thing that I feel really good about being in the music industry, and this is like less AI and more of just technology advancement in general, is as like technology has gotten better and better, and Oculus Rift and Apple Vision Pro, and holy shit, I put one on the other day and it's insane. You're almost at Yosemite. Like, you're almost at Yosemite, but you're not at Yosemite.
Yeah.
You're only there if you're breathing the mountain air. And I don't give a damn if you can now buy a mask and breathe the mountain air and what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
if they recreate the Matrix entirely, I'm a believer in the city of Zion. You know what I'm saying? And concerts are like the real experience, right? And as the digital world has gotten more and more intense, the concert industry trends have just gone up into the right. And I just believe that will continue. I believe that if, the digital world and AI and technology takes off more and more and more, concerts will continue to have a part in the future, and it's actually going to just increase. It's anti-fragile to this advancement of the technology. That's what I believe. I think this industry is safe in that regard, and people will always want to see people create and what they have to offer to the world, and with, all the tools that are out there. So it's a weird world. We don't know what the future brings. That's my, I don't know, TED talk on it.
Yeah. Look, I mean, look, I'm you know, definitely kind of a techno optimist on it, probably too far that way, or just in general, right? I tend
Yeah.
to see the half glass half full stuff, and I look, I think there's every chance that at some point in the next couple of years, you just an AI is literally building something competing with all of these things, and I think software is one of the going to be one of the riskiest places to be. But from a people point of view, if engineering on roster gets more efficient and more effective, right? If they can be 2x or 3x or 50%, that's actually only creating more value and
Yeah, I
need
could use
somewhere
it. I
else,
could I could
right?
use a 50x enhance. Like,
But
there's
like
so much I want to do with Prism,
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, and this goes back to what I talked about before, like things that might not have been viable for us to put to go after. So like I'll give you an example. Like
Yeah,
we
maybe it
do
just
this thing.
unlocks creative expression beyond,
Yeah, but also just value, right? Like it
right.
doesn't even have to be creative. Like, so there's this, like we know that people find and approach and sign artists on roster based on if they have representation. We know that that happens, right? And we think that there is a world, and it's going to happen, and we'll probably build it where we create this kind of marketplace for that, right? Where like, hey, here are these artists. They
That's
might be
cool.
anonymous. They might be where you're like, hey, I'm looking for hip hop artists with this kind of thing that don't have a record label, that are looking for a record label. Like many industries have this kind of like transactional marketplace, right? Music doesn't, again, some cultural reasons. But for us to build it, it's really expensive because it's like a very, like you'll know this, it's like a very product design
Extremely.
intense thing,
Too hard
right?
bucket right now.
You've
Yeah.
got this like, you've got this marketplace. There's two things you've got to like. It's just very expensive to build. I'm going to need a lot more engineers, and again, I'm going to then need to find people to pay for it, right? Whereas what I think is going to, if so, this is just an example. Like, say for example, say in the next couple of years, AI gets to the point where that reduces that cost to a level that's acceptable for me. I can build that product. Now you have a product in the world that creates value, that creates opportunities. I probably now need to have like a salesperson, or I need to have support people. Like, so I think a lot of people see it like, oh, everything's going to be replaced. Whereas I think the techno optimists and like whenever when you look at it, you're like, well, what value is it going to create?
Right.
And like, it's going to be somewhere in the middle, right? A
Yeah, I
lot of
can
people are going to
see.
get,
Oh,
no, no,
please.
it's going to be
Okay.
somewhere. It's going to be somewhere in the middle. I just tend to see that side of it.
It's a curious world moving into the future. I think folks, entrepreneurs like me and you are at the end of the day, we have to choose what we build because products are hard. I mean, even, Prism and ROSTR are one sites, but even Spotify, we had a conversation earlier. There's only so much Spotify can do. And on one side, if AI gets good enough from a software perspective, then that will unlock the realm of things that we can do. I mean, there's so many things that I want to do with Prism that I can't do. And you brought up in-app messaging with Roster and all those things. So I can, and AI is not there yet, where all of a sudden I'm like, wow, I can just go crazy and do the 10 things or the 100 things that I want to do with Prism that I couldn't. I could see a world where AI enables my team to actually go and do those things. I think that's a giant leap from where we are right now. An even bigger leap is beyond that, where once again, where it starts getting into like crazy science fiction realms. And I don't know, it's a fun conversation, but it's also just like it's just too unknown for me to see that future. And it's probably more philosophic than our audience even cares about, but it's fun. It's curious. We don't know. It's a true unknown. We don't know where this is going to go in the world, but for the time being, my focus is on utilizing that technology to make things better and better and better. And I think that's where most people in the world are with it, and that's what makes me optimistic as well.
Yeah.
On that note, in terms of products, I think a lot of people would love to see Prism and Roster integrated. We should probably make that happen someday in the future.
Yeah.
It would
I mean,
definitely, yeah, go ahead.
this is it all comes back to it, right? Like, there's so many, and this is, I think, this kind of comes across as like, there's a few different places that would make a few different companies, and the startup ecosystem in music tech, I like describe to someone, I think like we're all so busy fighting for our lives, right? That it's very hard to be like integrated and build these platforms. But I think it's getting there, like to the point now where, if you can find that path through for us, like, I think we're still very insular, but we're getting to that point where we're starting to go, okay, great, can we be in this place and can we help over here? And I think so. I think we're getting there. It's just everything is like, wow, okay, how do you resource this?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's some bright future where
But I mean,
AI,
our crossover of customers must be insane. Like, I mean, it's
it
like
is. Yeah.
it's
Just when you book a show in Prism, automatically having the contact information come in,
yeah,
like that's a low hanging fruit, but there's really, so much more that are,
yeah.
and by the way, more and more of my customers are using you and they're like, oh yeah, there's this thing roster. I found out about it last week. One of the reasons why I did this podcast is I don't know, I just know you. So I guess I assume everyone knew you, but someone told me they just found out about roster last week and I was like, what? Like you didn't know about roster? So
It's
I hope by
wild,
doing this
dude.
podcast, more and more people find out about it because it's a very good thing for the industry. And I do want to hook it up with Prism eventually. And I'm, and like, yeah, there's a handful of people I think that are, leading this charge of like using software to make the industry better and better and better and have a balance of music industry and tech experience and are coming at this from the right perspective and, like really listening at those key moments where, the industry tells us why things are a certain way. And and negotiating. All right, well, what things should be kept the same way? What things should evolve? And where should we, where should the industry be ushered into a new future? Whereas it's like, where shouldn't it be? And there is skepticism that, not change is not good, right? And I think like really good people working with the industry, like and being in those tough conversations and negotiating the future is how it's going to happen in the best possible way, and how tech is going to enable the music industry for the better. And I have full confidence that you, my friend, sitting over there in the seat in LA across the interweb, is one of the people that I also trust to have those conversations and bring the industry to a good place. So I'm happy to be, sharing your story with my network, and I hope some people in your network learn about Prism as well. Anyway,
Yeah.
but yeah.
No, it's super cool. Yeah, really, really good. And then we just got to get back on the mountain next year.
Yes, yes. What's your
Uh,
favorite? Is Palisades, formerly
yeah,
known FKA Squaw? Is that your
I had
favorite?
such a good week there. We took the kids out of school before spring break, and the mountain was empty and it snowed every day, and it was like glorious. So good.
Amazing,
I love that. I
amazing.
love that mountain so much. It's like I go to Mammoth a bunch, but like, and obviously we skied in Aspen. It's great, but nothing's like Palisades. So good.
Well, let's end with this. What are you most optimistic about? What's the future that you're looking forward to with roster, with the music industry as a whole? Let's end on an optimistic message.
Jeez. Yeah. It's a good question. I think I think at least for me, like our world is very much built around representation, talent representation, right? That's where roster starts, right? That's and I think like and I've been talking to talent reps, managers, or agents now for 12 years, I guess, 13 years. It feels like a step change in professionalism and capability, especially like on the management side in the last, I would say like 5, 10 years or so. It just feels like there's like a lot of really interesting stuff happening, and managers are playing a much more active role in a bunch of different things, and that's where so much of like the blocker is. And again, on the agency side, there's so many more agencies now that are since COVID. There's a bunch of like these smaller agencies that have done really well and survived and haven't been sucked up yet. And so there's a little bit more variance there. And overall, we see it a lot. But I think that there is, and I think this also comes down to money. I think that there is more revenue flowing through into these things. And so they're becoming more professional. And I think that has a big impact on what you can do with artists, which means that, this isn't every artist in the world, but, at the top end of things, I think artists are better served than they have been historically. And that's going to make the industry better, like just better organization, better music, artists being serviced. And that's kind of cool to see from the inside.
I love it. Something that you were saying there is something that I want to pay homage to. Is I think it empowers an independent industry, and it's a lot of what Prism is doing too, is democratizing these tools. And I think technology at its best, especially software as a service platforms, give independent businesses the tools that would be locked up in businesses that have reached massive amounts of scale. And you're doing that, like I think, before roster, certain giant conglomerates in the industry had their own contact bases of everyone. And now, you're democratizing that. And I see the future that you're creating with, a really kind of tech positive powered industry connectivity. It's a really beautiful vision for the future. And I'm leaving this conversation feeling really optimized and excited to play my part too. So anyway, let's end on that note,
Right.
man. This is an
Awesome.
awesome conversation. We went many different places. I think there was also, some tracks that folks could follow, but if not, it's a podcast. Who cares? That's what it's about. Anyway, thank you, man. This is
No, thank
awesome.
you.
Yeah, I
That was really
appreciate
cool.
you. Yeah.
All right.
So we finished the pod and then we forgot to talk about jobs, and Mark's blowing my mind about jobs. So we're firing it back up. Tell me, so how many people are using jobs?
it's like 20,000 visits a week on the website. We launched it 7 months ago as a test. We built. I got pissed off with something one weekend, and on the Monday morning, I told my team we're going to launch a job site, and they said when, and I said in 3 weeks, and we launched it 3 weeks later. And it's white label software. We did a great launch, and now we just had a couple of weeks ago, 500th employer signed up, over 1,000 jobs have been posted. I think we have anywhere from 3 to 5 times as many jobs live at any given point than most of the other niche job boards. And I think it is like, if
How many
maybe
jobs do you
one,
have to get posted day one, and like how has it grown? Because like there's once again, you're like the master of chicken and egg problems, man. It's impressive.
well, we went out and we have like, I got the entire team. We didn't resource it until January this year. We hired Katie, who's now running that, and we just hired someone else for it, Kaylee. But we had the whole team reach out to anyone that we knew had a job out. We had 20 companies at launch, including folks like, I don't know who was on there, like Live Nation and some agencies and UTA, I think. And we launched it, but we launched it with this tagline that really worked, was like, music industry job boards suck. And people responded, like they really responded to it. And they tend to. And so, but then we had this strategy where we're like, look, it's not our core business. It doesn't need to be our core business. And we can allow people to post jobs for free, which is what they do. So, you don't have to think twice. You can just come on, you can post your job for free, or you can pay for one of our promoted products. You don't have to. And so now we're in this
How many people are
incredible,
paying for it?
I would say like
What percentages,
five, maybe right now, maybe 5% in a given
Yeah.
week, maybe
Yeah.
more, but like,
So the vast
don't,
majority aren't. Yeah.
but we
Interesting.
don't, yeah, but we also don't really care right now. Like, you know, I was saying just before, like, jobs drives, oh, sorry, you got my dog's butt in the thing. Jobs, jobs drive, he's just, yeah, they drive audience for roster, but it's also really good brand for us because, we know many people now who have got jobs through jobs by
It
roster.
total makes sense. Yeah.
Like, and so it's great from a branding point of view. And my philosophy with it is like, look, we're going to get to this point long term where but jobs by roster has so many jobs on it that there will always be around 10% of people paying for it, which means it can be sustainable. But then there's also loads of other opportunities. So,
You
you
just
know,
use Discord or something? What was the
say
white?
again.
What did you use Discord for the white label kind of
No,
spot?
no, it's a software as a service job board thing. Like, I didn't think it needed, like, the software is better than most of these other job boards,
Yeah.
but a little bit like roster, like
Incredible.
what's
Yeah.
important is the content, right? And the way that you run it, and the way that we try to do it. And we try to enforce stuff like, there's rules around salary ranges, and we're trying to be more open. We make sure that jobs die after 30 days unless they're updated, so it's not full of old crap. But overall, I think this stuff is just about being like cleaner and faster, and that's what we are.
Yeah.
Cleaner, faster, just like roster. And in the future, I think there's also like these cool opportunities. Like, we already are building up like a pretty crazy database of people who work in the music industry, which means that in the future there might be like, headhunters by roster. Like we have, a group of people who do executive search. That's a possibility. We also want to do more to blow up people who are looking for roles, like cool people, like, hey, you need this, like we wouldn't charge for that. And then the other thing is like, how do we help people who are being laid off, and start creating, which there's a lot right now, and start creating resources for them. So like the secret product that I just showed you in between recording, that'll be a little bit about these kind of like resources and helping people. So it's really cool. And it goes back to this concept is like where I want to be in, let's say, I mean, with this for a lot of people now, but where I want to be in a couple of years is you won't do your job in the music industry on a daily basis without using one of Roster's products. And we're making it easier and better for you to do your jobs. And of course, starting with like job listings is one of those things.
Amazing. It's such a cool product. Once again, I guess I'm just a fan from the outside. I saw that launch, and there's another thing that turned my head. And I think I shot you a text. I'm like, job board, like, man, that makes a ton of sense. Like, but I had no idea how it would go. And I mean,
Yeah,
it's
I
amazing
mean,
that it's just going really, really well.
we didn't look again. It comes back to it. Like if it cost me a ton to run, I don't know how viable it would be to try it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the fact that
Absolutely.
we could test it, it worked, it's beneficial, and ultimately, I'm hoping it's like, it gets to a point where it can pay for a couple of staff members, but it creates brand and connections, and I think that'll allow us to go further. But it's cool. It's been really fun. We learned like we knew nothing about jobs, literally nothing about it, and super interesting launching right now because I talked about how many visits we get, which is all well and good, but we're at a stage in the cycle right now where what there was a time during the pandemic, right, to go back to it, where employers were like couldn't find staff, right? Like you just couldn't
Yeah.
get hold of people, and it was a real candidates market. Now with all of the layoffs, it's a real employers market.
Mm.
Every job is getting hundreds of applications. With ROSTR, we put a job, very meta, we put a job to run jobs by roster on jobs by roster. We had 350 applications in 4 days,
Wow.
and not like really good. And we just hired for someone else to work on that team. We had to shut it down after 3 days because we had 300 plus applications. So you're seeing this because it sucks. The market out there right now, there are a lot of extremely qualified people and not enough jobs. And
Yeah.
so it's been fascinating to watch, like to understand like the market dynamics here. Like it's not that difficult to get traffic.
Yeah.
What is more difficult is good jobs and making sure they get good candidates. Like
Well,
really difficult.
congrats on your success with that one. And from day one, it just made so much sense because the music industry is this interest. It's like it's an esoteric industry. Like there's not you can't throwing it up on LinkedIn just seems like really tedious. You're gonna have all these like random people apply. So for it to be this kind of like in-network thing, and it's a filter of like you don't really know about roster job board unless you are familiar with the music industry. It just really made a ton of sense. So I'm really glad to hear that it's going well.
So,
And
something that's really cool is you see companies that would not normally post a job are posting jobs. So like, cool management companies,
yeah.
like previously they might put like a story up on Insta, right? And then it's like texted around, which is a sucky way to hire because you just end up hiring people like you, right? Like that's if it's too
Yeah.
referral based. But we're seeing these like quote unquote like cool boutique companies that would never have put a job listing up list on jobs by roster. That's
Yeah.
really cool. That's that kind of like behavioral shift that's like really dope.
Amazing. All right. Well,
Cool.
end podcast number 2.
All right, dude.
Wasting
You got
hours, flowers.